Hi guys, John the Morgile here, checking in for a new Flat Earth video for you. I hope you do enjoy it. Before we get started, I'll quickly mention that this channel is viewer supported, so if you'd like to help support the channel, your contributions are welcomed and appreciated. Many thanks to those of you guys out there who have been helpful. God bless you and thank you so much for your help. And I will put links in the description box below for PayPal and Patreon and all of those. So this video is titled The Columbus Conundrum. As we all remember from the federal indoctrination campaign, in around 1492, Columbus allegedly sailed west from Europe, hoping to find an easy pass to the east coast of India in order to avoid the arduous Silk Road and its exorbitant tariffs involved with shipping goods between Europe and Eastern Asia. People were paying super high premiums for imported goods due to the perils and the tariffs tacked on when passing through the many various borders along the Silk Road. This caused a situation where really only the wealthy could afford luxuries and staple items alike when it came to imports. Now, if Europeans could avoid all of these premiums along the way by sailing directly to the east side of the Indian continent, they can enjoy all sorts of obvious benefits, including direct access to imports from the Far East and more competitive domestic exports, or at least higher profit margins on them. There's only one problem. The American continents were in the way, which up to Columbus's day, history purports that the known world was unaware of the existence of the entire American continents, along with thousands of extra miles of ocean, including the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, plus 2,500 miles of the North American continent thereabouts, plus or minus. All in all, about 6,000 miles, which was not on any of the maps available to Columbus, which is the conundrum that we'll highlight in this video. Before moving on to that, it's important to mention that we can find evidence of communication and influence between the Americas, Europe, and the Far East, apparently prior to Columbus and possibly prior to the Great Flood or the Mud Flood / Reset event, which seems to have wiped out a forgotten advanced civilization which must have held a presence across the world long in the forgotten past. Our modern civilization has cultural amnesia of this highly advanced civilization, but its remnants can be found, often buried under meters of mud. We find similar architectural styles all over the world, in areas which are said to have been isolated from one another by often hundreds of years and insurmountable barriers like oceans and thousands of miles. We find evidence of some prehistoric civilization who had the ability to mold and move massive stones and precisely combine them into laser-perfect constructs quite easily. And these continue to baffle historians and challenge the accepted historical narrative. It seems there have been a number of devastating cataclysmic events throughout history which crippled our ancestors' civilization, and at some point an extreme event which left scattered remnants across the world as the only testament to their existence and superior technologies and abilities. Even monolithic era temples appear to have commonalities from continent to continent, although these isolated civilizations are purported to have been out of touch with one another. Similarities between the architecture of the same spirit between the Americas and the Eurasian continents leave clues to the existence of this ancient civilization, which was apparently wiped out by some cataclysm, natural or otherwise. There are instances of Egyptian mummies being found with tobacco and cocaine in their mummified preserved cells and even in their hair samples, suggesting trade between the ancient Americas and Egypt. Let's not forget the fact that large red-haired giants clad with ornate Viking-style garb were purportedly found mummified in the Americas, implying that Scandinavian or Norse seafarers were making trips to the Americas long before Columbus even put his shoes on, certainly before he sailed the ocean blue. But this interesting thread is not the main point of the video here. The point to highlight is the fact that the globe Earth proponents often claim that everyone has known the Earth is a spinning ball for thousands of years, alluding to the ancient Greek Eratosthenes, who allegedly estimated the circumference of the ball Earth by first assuming the Earth to be a ball in the first place, a major assumption which is granted for argument's sake for the purposes of arriving at a mathematical conclusion. Of course, at some point, this assumption must be tested and proven, something that never seemed to have been important to the evolution of the ball Earth theory. It appears that it was good enough to simply accept this assumption and others, and subsequently use the mathematics as proof of the theory or as proof of the assumption. This is nothing less than pseudoscience and circular logic, as such mathematics support the conclusions of the Earth's circumference, but only if the primary assumption happens to be true. The main premise in this assumption, the Earth actually being spherical in the first place, is not supported by the math. Let's be clear, Eratosthenes' application of the Pythagorean theorem in this example is ingenious and is extremely accurate mathematically speaking. It simply doesn't apply to reality. It only applies to a hypothetical which happens to be false. Anyone who claims Eratosthenes' experiment proves the sphere Earth is mistaken and is merely parroting what they have been told in error. Eratosthenes' experiment proves the circumference of the Earth, but only if you first assume the Earth to be a sphere in the first place, with an extremely distant sun, which we'll dissect a bit further in this video. For now, it's important to punctuate the important distinction between mathematics proving a concept, whether or not that concept happens to hold any place in actuality. To claim Eratosthenes' method proves the Earth to be a ball is a misrepresentation of his activity and is not sound science. It is pseudoscience and circular logic tantamount to putting lipstick on a pig and claiming that the pig is a beautiful woman, as everyone knows that pigs don't wear lipstick, but only beautiful women do, right? We'll get back to Eratosthenes in a bit, but for now, let's dissect the elephant in the living room, the fact that to this very day, many people in America and across the world call Native Americans Indians. This is because, of course, Christopher Columbus believed until his death that he had indeed landed in the eastern end of the Indian continent, near Japan, thus dubbing the indigenous people as Indians. This blunder of Columbus echoes through history right down to today, when even some of the most learned scholars will erroneously call the Native Americans Indians. So if Columbus knew that the world was a ball, with a circumference of about 25,000 miles, and he knew the approximate dimensions of the known world, including the Indian subcontinent, then why was it that he made such a huge blunder when arriving at an entirely new and uncharted continent? How could he have possibly thought that he had arrived near Japan when he was actually in the Bahamas? Clearly, the globe-trotted belief that Columbus and all the other mariners, along with the entire world at large, knew about Eratosthenes' value is erroneous. Otherwise, he would have realized that he was about 6,000 miles short of his target destination. A 100% margin of error. Way off, right? Along with the assumption that the Earth is a sphere in shape, a few other assumptions are granted for argument's sake in order to arrive at the conclusion for the Earth's circumference, or c, during Eratosthenes' geometric activity. For one, the Sun must be assumed as practically infinitely distant, where all of the Sun's rays are approaching the Earth parallel to one another, perfectly parallel for all intents and purposes. These two assumptions, again the Earth being a sphere with parallel sun rays emanating from a very distant sun, must be logically and skeptically challenged if we're going to adhere to the spirit of unbiased and accurate science. So let's do that. Let's assume that the Sun is not very far away, practically local in fact, with divergent rays approaching a planar Earth, a viable alternative to Eratosthenes' assumptions. With these assumptions in place, we come to a much different conclusion than Eratosthenes, and instead of mathematically proving c, as, well, there is no c if the Earth is a plane as opposed to a sphere, then we glean data which can be used to estimate the size and the distance to the Sun, With these assumptions in play, we find the sun to be between 30 and 35 miles in diameter, with an altitude of about 3,000 miles. This is interesting as the alleged spherical radius of the Earth is just shy of 3,000 miles, a figure which is not a coincidence. So keep that in mind. The alleged spherical radius of the Earth is virtually identical to the flat Earth distance to the Sun. Now, you may remember a video released a few years ago by Dr. Zack. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card right here. And I'm going to play a clip from this video. I do urge you to check this video out as it is very important.
We're going to convert a flat table to a round table using mathematics and shadows. In other words, we're going to redo Eratosthenes experiments in a small scale, considering a flat table as the flat Earth. Now, the first thing we're going to start with is the angles of elevation of the sun. Okay, if you place a stick on the ground to measure the shadow, you get 3 angles. This is called the base of the triangle, which has to be 90 degrees. This is the angle of elevation, and this is the angle that Eratosthenes used in his math. I couldn't find a good name for it, so I'm just gonna call it the angle of deception. So here is the table. We got an A3 paper on it, and 9 nails, as you can see. Imagine you are on that paper, and that paper is the Earth, and this bulb is the sun. It's 50 centimeters above the table. It's exactly 90 degrees above the nail in the middle. All the nails are 5 centimeters except the one in the middle. And the distance between each nail is written on the paper, as you can see here. Our unit of measure is centimeters, okay? Some people think that if you use more than 3 objects, you would not be able to triangulate the bulb. They're wrong. If you model it and do it in real life, you will get the same results. All the elevation angles, or better said light rays, come from the center of the bulb, and all the depression angles go to the tip of the shadows. So light rays of the experiment should intersect in the bulb. Here are the measurements that we got in AutoCAD. But of course, this is just a 3D program. Now we're gonna do the same exact thing in real life, and we will get the same length of the shadows. And I am so sorry that I have no way to prove to you that we are not faking this experiment. Well, I guess there is only one way to find out. You're gonna have to do it yourself. Don't trust me, trust yourself. Here are the guys who did the experiment: AG and Iban and Ayat and Damar. So here is the experiment. The nails are 5 centimeters long. The one in the middle was put there just to demonstrate that the bulb is 90 degrees above it. And as you can see, it has no shadow at all. The farthest nail is 15 centimeters away from the center, and the closest is 5 centimeters away from the center. And the last one is 10 centimeters away. We used 9 nails and 3 distances because the lens was not big enough. They put the 5 centimeter nails and the bulb in the appropriate distances, and here are the measurements of each shadow. Please compare them to the results of the 3D model that you got on the screen. If you do this correctly, you will get a very precise results. I did this before, and people who have been following me already know it. So if you are new and you want to watch this with great detail, just click on this link right here and watch my other video. You will find the link in the description. The 3D model here matched reality so accurately. All the shadows that I got in the 3D model matched the shadows that we got on this table. Now, if we were Eratosthenes fans and wanted to do the same thing with the sun in real life, our experiments would fail. We would not be able to triangulate the sun. The cones, or the lines that we would draw to triangulate the sun, would not intersect in one point like in the 3D model that I just showed you. And this is gonna make us think that the Earth is not flat, because the triangulations worked on the experiments that we did on the flat table, but did not work on the sun in real life. So something must be wrong. You would think, what is it? This must mean that the Earth is not flat. So if we really were those scientists, you would have to think about something else, like the Earth being a globe, for example. Yeah. So this is how they came up with the globe theory. The angles of elevation led them to think about the globe model. They were just assumptions based on mathematics. Forgive me, but I'm gonna say this one more time. If you use more than 3 positions to triangulate the sun, assuming that the Earth is flat, your triangulation will never work. No matter how hard you try, you will always fail. The sun rays will never intersect in one point. I have been doing this for a long time and I had to come to this conclusion. Some of you might think that if the distances between the objects are not accurate, then the triangulation will not work. And I agree with that, but even if the distances were 100% accurate, the triangulations would never work. And I'm gonna prove what I'm saying with another experiment. As we said in the previous videos about refraction, the sun is never in its real position. Even modern science agrees with us. What you are triangulating is a reflection of the sun. And this is why your triangulation will never work. Imagine yourself in the bottom of a swimming pool trying to triangulate a bulb that is above the water. You will never be able to triangulate it unless you know how refraction works on water. The experiments will explain this better. Just stay with us. So Eratosthenes and his friends decided that the Earth is not flat, because there was no way to make the angles of elevation work and make sense. For example, whenever they triangulate the sun from 2 positions, the distance to the sun appears to be around 3,000 miles. And at the same time they triangulate it from 2 other positions and they get a distance of 4,000 miles. Solving this at that time was impossible, and it was still impossible to us until a few months ago. Anyways, these mathematicians had to find a way to make these angles work, so they assumed that the Earth is a globe and the sun rays come to Earth in parallel lines, because this was the only way to make the angles work. So their only problem was how to know the circumference of the Earth so that angles can work perfectly. Let me show you how the angles work on the globe model. It doesn't matter how big the globe is. The angles will work the same, but we will use this exact radius of the Earth, 3,959 miles. I'm gonna divide the Earth into 24 parts because it takes the Earth 24 hours to rotate. So, here is the distance between each point, and that means that if you are here, your elevation angle will be 90 degrees because the sun is right above your head. So imagine you got friends all over the globe. Your friend right here would not have the sun directly overhead because he is 1 hour away from you. So his elevation angle is going to be 75 degrees because the Earth rotates 15 degrees every hour. So every hour you will have 15 degrees less. Here you're gonna have 75 degrees, and here you're gonna have 60 degrees, and here 45 degrees, and so on. If this is confusing, then here is an easy way to know if this is accurate. Do you realize now the weakness of the flat Earth? If yes, then you will love what's coming next. Eratosthenes had no idea what the atmosphere is, so he just assumed that the sunlight comes in straight parallel lines to make his math work, and it did work. Now we know that the atmosphere bends the light. So if the sunlight really bends, then how come Eratosthenes' math is correct? It doesn't make any sense. His math was based on straight lines. So I believe that in order to save the globe model, our scientists told us that the atmosphere bends the light, but it's almost unnoticeable. So if the apparent sun is right above the horizon line, that means that the real sun is right below it, and the angle between them is around 0.84 degrees approximately. So are we supposed to believe this without any experiments to back up their claim? To me, this is just an assumption. The air is full of water and gases, and we know that water affects the light a lot. The air sometimes magnifies objects. It makes them look bigger and closer. Sometimes it works like water, sometimes it doesn't. We really don't know what it is or how it works. So scientists, please stop making up assumptions based on numbers. Okay, right now we're gonna redo Eratosthenes' experiments, but this time we will use refraction. The difference between part 1 and part 2 is refraction, so we added a concave lens to represent the atmosphere. The rest is still the same. And no, we are not saying that the atmosphere is concave. We don't know what it is. Each lens will give you an interesting result, so we chose a concave lens. So please focus on this because it's gonna blow your mind. I'm gonna do my best to make it as easy as possible to understand. So the concave lens is 30 centimeters above the table and the bulb is still at the same height, 50 centimeters. The nail that is in the center of the paper is 90 degrees below the lens and the bulb. That is why it has no shadow at all. We put it there just to make sure it is 90 degrees below the bulb. The distance between each object is still the same as before, but as you can see now, the shadows are longer than before thanks to the concave lens. And this is what a concave lens does to the light. It makes light rays diverge, and this is why the shadows become longer. So the distances we are going to work with are 5, 10, and 15 centimeters. And the shadows we're going to work with are 0.83, 1.7, and 2.69 centimeters. Okay? If you were so small on that paper, then the light you will see is just another image of the light that is projecting somewhere on the lens. But from the table you cannot see it. So if you don't consider the lens, your math will not be correct, even if you make it work. Please imagine Eratosthenes is on that table right now looking at the bulb through that lens. Can he see where the real bulb is? Of course not. So he's gonna do some triangulations to know how far the bulb is. But he is so smart, he automatically realized that triangulating the bulb from a flat lens would never work, because every time he does that, he gets different distances to the bulb. So he thought that the table cannot be flat, because if it was flat, then the elevation angles or light rays will intersect in the center of the bulb, exactly like in the first experiment. He has to think that the table is round, because the math will only work on a round table, because he had no idea what the atmosphere can do to the light. So this is what Eratosthenes did in details. Imagine this nail on the left side is Alexandria and the nail in the middle is Syene. Syene in his experiments was 90 degrees below the sun, so that nail in our experiments is also 90 degrees below the bulb. Now the distance between Syene and Alexandria was 800 kilometers or 500 miles, but in our experiments we can just assume it's 15 centimeters. Well, the shadow of this nail that represents Alexandria is 2.69 centimeters. So, to get the angle of deception that Eratosthenes used in his experiments, all we have to do is draw the nail that is 5 centimeters and draw the shadow that is 2.69 centimeters. And then we measure this angle and it is 28.26 degrees. So Eratosthenes divided 360 by his angle of deception, which was 7.2 degrees. But in our case, it's 28.26 degrees. So we get 12.73 centimeters and many decimals. Then Eratosthenes multiplied the results by the distance. If we want to do the same thing, then we should multiply 12.73 by 15 centimeters. So we get 191.08 centimeters in circumference. And that means that 191.08 centimeters is the circumference of the globe table. Now we can assume that the table is a globe because the angles work on it, right? So the table is now a globe with a circumference of 191.08 centimeters, which makes its radius to be 30.4113 centimeters.
Dr. Zack mathematically proves a rather small and obviously flat table to be a sphere, using the very same method as Eratosthenes on a smaller scale, of course. This perfectly illustrates how mathematics can correctly support and appear to prove a complete fiction to be factual. Of course, the table is a planar surface, and the light above it is not infinitely distant with parallel rays emanating from it. However, hypothetically, little microscopic observers living upon such a surface may very well make these assumptions and never be wiser about it. They'd never know the difference, for they don't have the advantage that we have on the macro level to view the entire table at once. Of course, the light source is forced through a convex lens, which is slightly different than what we have here on the planar Earth. Instead of a convex lens enclosing the sun, we have the atmosphere, which affects each observer subjectively. However, it applies the same principles to the light, in effect. A few problems with Eratosthenes' assumptions, beyond the big one involving the Earth to be a sphere in the first place, is the assumption involving the sun's light rays approaching the world at practically parallel angles to one another. The biggest problem involves the observation of what are called crepuscular rays, which clearly show the sunlight to be coming from a relatively local source converging upon the source, not at all parallel to one another. Furthermore, the very heliocentric model demands the sunlight to be divergent when it comes to eclipses, wherein we have the umbra and penumbra, which shows the sunlight to be all but parallel in order for observations of eclipses to work. So which is it, the globe? Is the sunlight all parallel at all times, or do we have the converging sun rays creating the umbra and penumbra for eclipses to work? During solar eclipses, the shadow of the moon is typically about 50 to 100 miles in diameter, depending on the eclipse, a variable which should leave any globers scratching their head, however. But of course, during some eclipses, the moon's shadow is a mere 2 or 3 miles in diameter, which is simply not possible if we assume the moon to be a spherical object, some 250,000 miles away, with a diameter of 2,000 miles. This is frankly absurd, according to the globe-Earth model. If anyone out there can create a situation using a singular light source, the sun, and a basketball, the moon, where the basketball casts a shadow that is a few inches in diameter, the moon's shadow upon the Earth during an eclipse, then this rather obvious problem would be in the realm of possibility when it comes to humoring the globe-Earth theory for argument's sake. I can save you all some time and tell you there's no possible way to create such a situation, and the shadow of a basketball will always be at least the diameter of the basketball and can only ever be greater in diameter than the ball, not far smaller. In other words, you will never create a situation where the shadow of the basketball will be a few inches in diameter. In any case, the ball-Earth theory falls apart under every possible method of scrutiny, and the flat Earth hypothesis works perfectly, something which you find is a reoccurring theme when you go to investigate flat Earth. And I wouldn't even say reoccurring theme, it's more of an unbreakable rule which always favors the static planar Earth and shows the ball Earth to be a laughable, obvious ball of crap. So we're going to wrap this one up, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Again, if you'd like to support this channel and make a contribution through PayPal, Patreon, Venmo, and all those, Cash App, I'll put links in the description. Once again, your support is greatly appreciated and needed. God bless you guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.